Hi.
Hi, Magdalyn. I'm so excited to see you and chat about Jupiter.
Hi, Alice. Same here. I'm really stoked that we were able to make this happen.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
I'm so glad that we were able to meet on social media. And yeah, I just felt like I really, even though we practice different kinds of astrology, I really vibe with you and the way you think about things. And yeah, I'm just excited to have a cool conversation letting people know what's going on with Jupiter.
Same. Yeah. I think the fact that we both are astrologers who practice a different, like a slightly different, through a different lens of astrology is going to make for a really interesting conversation. Um, I guess just to like get started, my name is Magdalyn. I make content on TikTok under the account Delphi Astro. I've been practicing astrology for about 5 years. The past 2 years, I've become really focused on Hellenistic astrology, which is also called like Western or traditional astrology, which is unique because it focuses so heavily on the traditional or inner planets, which are like the moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, not so much on the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And it's also very like if you think of like a bottom up approach or like an event based approach of like these these planets, their placement in your natal chart and their movements in real time create situations or reflect situations that you live through, and we are products of our lived experience. And you kind of like look at it that way. And I know, Alice, you practice modern astrology.
Yeah, right. So thanks for introducing yourself, Magdalene, and I'll do the same. My name's Alice. I also create content on social media, mostly on TikTok and Instagram. My handle is at Alice Pope Astrology. I've also been studying astrology for about 5 years now. But I practice evolutionary astrology, which is a branch of modern astrology. So it comes out of and builds on these amazing branches of traditional astrology. But evolutionary astrology is a bit more psychological. It's a bit more focused on our thoughts and our feelings and our inner experience rather than like, predicting or talking about outer events in the world. Though I think both of these types of astrology do both of those things just to different degrees.
Yep.
But evolutionary astrology also focuses more heavily on the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all of which have been discovered, only in the last few hundred years, not the many thousands of years that astrology has been practiced by humans.
Yeah.
And the real heart of evolutionary astrology to me is that we focus a lot on the lunar nodes, which tell you about your soul's evolution over time. So the
Mm.
South Node tells you about your karmic past, whether you see that as past lives or, past generations, ancestral stuff. And then the North Node tells you about where you're growing in this lifetime, where your soul is wanting to evolve towards, hence evolutionary astrology.
Yeah.
So those are the different types that we practice. I'm from the Stephen Forrest School of Evolutionary Astrology. He's my teacher, and that's the type of astrology that I'm practicing. But yeah, I'm just excited to see the different kinds of perspectives that we both have on this big change that's happening soon with Jupiter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those like there are several different paths to the same place, or like you can look at astrology through several different lenses, and it will be coherent and meaningful and significant, and I think that's so beautiful. um Today we wanted to focus on kind of unpacking what Jupiter's been up to for the last year. So, Jupiter is going to be ingressing, changing sign, moving into Cancer, where it will spend about a year. And it's just been in Gemini for about a year. So, we thought we would do like a look back and then a look forward and kind of just a discussion from multiple viewpoints on Jupiter and what kind of experiences and situations it manifests as.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great description. So just to give you all a little bit of a timeline of the dates of what Jupiter's doing here, it's been in Gemini, like you said, Magdalene, for almost the last, or just over a year now. It entered Gemini on May 25th, 2024, and it's leaving Gemini in just over a week on June 9th, 2025. So Tuesday of next week.
I'm so
And on
excited.
that day, it's wild that this is already happening. Time flies, especially with
Yeah.
Jupiter and Gemini, as we'll see.
Okay.
But it's moving into Cancer on June 9th, and it'll be there for just over a year until June 29th, 2026. So
Mhm.
Jupiter takes about 12 years to orbit the zodiac, so it conveniently spends about 1 year in each sign. And it will also be going retrograde for a few months starting on November 11th, 2025 at 25 degrees. So kind of at the end of Cancer, it's going to stop in its tracks, station retrograde, start moving backwards. And then on March 11th, 2026, it'll stop at 15 degrees of Cancer and then keep on marching through that sign until it gets out next June in about a year from now.
Yeah. Spends about a year in a sign, retrograde for about 4-ish months.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that time it's going to be in Cancer.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about Jupiter, period. Like what does this planet signify? What does it represent? Um, I'll start, I guess, by saying when I think about Jupiter, I think about the divine yes principle. It's very like
Mhm.
yes, and Jupiter is seen as like this abundant, kind of expansive, like growth principle, and also really importantly brings like a sense of coherence and like higher meaning to the experiences we have. Jupiter is kind of characterized as a teacher, so is Saturn, but they're very like they have very different teaching styles, with Jupiter being a lot more like encouraging and like wanting us to feel the momentum that comes with growth, that like
Mm.
um you've gotten to a point where you're like actively overcoming something and experiencing the joy that comes with your triumph.
Heck yeah, I love that description. I love that the divine yes principle. That's such a
Yeah.
beautiful way of encapsulating Jupiter. And yeah, I mean, if you think about the planet physically, it's the biggest planet in the solar system, right? Like of the
Yeah,
bodies that we work with in astrology, obviously the sun is the biggest, but Jupiter is like a little mini second sun almost, right? It's like the big boy, the king of the gods,
totally.
if you will.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, it is this planet of like growth and expansion and abundance. I often think of it as the cosmic magnifying glass. It amplifies
Mm,
anything that it touches. And
yeah.
Jupiter is often seen as this very like lucky, positive, benefic planet.
Hmm.
But you know, something that we had chatted about before this, Magdalene, is that amplification isn't always necessarily good, right? You can
Yeah.
amplify things that aren't so amazing, like say like a pandemic or misinformation, or you know, a couple topics that we're going to be getting into as we talk about this stuff. Jupiter just kind of magnifies anything that it touches. So, you know, for
Hmm.
better and for worse. Um,
Yeah.
but I also like how you mentioned that it has to do with not only expansion, but it really has the sense of wisdom to it. Jupiter rules the signs of Sagittarius and Pisces,
Mhm.
both of which are associated with wisdom, with spirituality, with faith. And I think Jupiter to me represents what it is that allows us to be resilient. Like if you have some kind of sense of like faith or like greater meaning of, you know, life,
Yeah.
it's easier to bounce back from challenges. It's easier to be confident because you're drawing energy and faith and resilience kind of from the universe, right? Jupiter is all
Yeah.
about like this big picture, expansive view.
Mhm.
Whereas interestingly, Gemini kind of has to do more with like this more zoomed in view of like little details and pieces of information. So it's kind of an interesting combination having Jupiter and Gemini, which of course we're going to unpack in a moment.
Completely. And the idea of, okay, so Jupiter spreads. When it's in Gemini, what is it spreading? And that
Mhm.
depends on what Gemini means. So let's get into that. Um, Go ahead and tell me what Gemini is all about.
Yeah, so just a couple basics on Gemini. This is the mutable air sign. So any air sign has largely to do with like thoughts and ideas. That's the air element. And then a mutable sign is all about change and transformation, wrapping up the season, in this case, the end of spring, transitioning into summer. So I think that Gemini, as the mutable air sign, has a lot to do with changing your mind, changing the way that you think, like learning and information.
Mm.
Gemini symbolized by the twins, the only zodiac sign that like has two people in it. And what do you think those two twins are doing? They're chatting, they're talking to each other, they're kikiing back and forth. Gemini is
Yeah.
a sign that's very communicative. It's very talkative, it's very curious, it's very quick, this kind of, like back and forth rapid
Yeah.
fire talking. Um, Another thing to know about Gemini is that it tends to be a pretty kind of scattered, unfocused, chaotic kind of sign.
Mm.
And I have a lot of Gemini in my chart, so I feel, totally comfortable
Yeah,
reading Gemini. And you
sure.
might even see some of
You
this,
deserve it.
thank you.
Thank
Yes, coming
you.
across in even the way that I communicate. But Gemini tends to have this very kind of scattered, like jack of all trades kind of energy, because it's a sign that just wants to learn everything. It's the sign of perception, of information, of language, and all different kinds of communication. And it's also related to like your local environment and your local community, which is an important topic that I actually don't really hear discussed too often when it comes to Gemini. But it's a very mundane sign. It's very much like, who are the people around you, your platonic relationships, your neighbors, your friends, your siblings, your local community, the way you move through that local community, like walking and biking, or like your daily commute to work. All of these things are the purview of the sign of Gemini.
That's so interesting. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't get talked about very much. I I'm imagining that part of that is because so it's about Gemini being the third sign and like the third house being about, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And like the circumstances, just like the environmental truths of like
Mm,
the aquarium that you're in or
yeah.
whatever. That's I really love that. That's definitely, I think, unique to like evolutionary or modern astrology. Yeah, from a Hellenistic standpoint, one of the first things that I think of when I think of Gemini is that it is a sign that's ruled by Mercury.
Mhm.
In Hellenistic, or like from a traditional view, Gemini gets all of its significations from its ruling planet, which is Mercury. And Mercury is absolutely the chatterbox. I also think of it as like trickster or class clown kind of energy.
Mm,
Like
mhm.
everybody else is trying to make sense of the world, and Gemini doesn't necessarily need what it says in the moment to make sense tomorrow. It's like
Ooh.
very willing to like say the crazy thing and then also say the opposite, an equally opposite and also crazy thing.
Yes, yes.
um, and so thinking about Mercury as ruler of Gemini, I also think about how Mercury is described as like this master debater, or like this the master of arguments. Mercury is so good at looking at a big picture concept and breaking it down and being like, okay, so this makes sense because this makes sense. Let's talk about this and like really flesh it out. Very good at like diving down rabbit holes and spending days, weeks, months in them. Um, and it's interesting because Jupiter actually kind of represents the opposite of that. It's very like, what, with all of these details and all of this information, what concept can we build out of it? How do all of these little details actually make sense? Um, it's kind of like Mercury, okay, if life is a car, Mercury wants to take the car apart and look at all of the different parts of it. Jupiter wants to drive the car. Jupiter
Mm.
wants to create meaning out of the different pieces. And so when Jupiter is in a sign like Gemini, it's said to be debilitated. It has a hard time making that meaning because the focus is so much on the fine details, which change day by day. The little stuff changes. And so if you're so immersed in those like small things, you never get to the big thing and you never get to make meaning out of it.
Oof.
So in my chart, Jupiter is debilitated. Jupiter is in Virgo. And so
Same.
yeah, so I definitely experience the difficulty of like, okay, you can work on this one sentence all day. And at the end of it, you're not going to have a paragraph, babe. You're going to have one really good sentence. And what's
Oh
that
my
going to do for you? So like,
God.
it's not exactly the same as Jupiter in Gemini, but this tension between the details and the big picture is definitely something that I live with daily.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot about Jupiter and Mercury as like planetary rivals because I also have a lot of this kind of like opposition in my chart
Hmm.
because Mercury rules two signs, Gemini and also Virgo that you just mentioned. And then Jupiter rules two signs, Sagittarius, which is opposite to Gemini, and then
Mhm.
Pisces, which is opposite to Virgo. At
Yeah.
least in traditional astrology, Jupiter rules Pisces. A lot of modern astrologies ascribe Neptune, a more recently discovered planet, as the ruler of Pisces. I actually consider both Jupiter and Neptune to rule Pisces.
Sure.
And maybe that's the Gemini in me that like wants to include all the information and all the options and not leave anything out.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a
that's
sign of
very
the like
Gemini.
the
Yeah.
duality.
Hmm.
But so it's interesting the way that Jupiter and Mercury rule these opposite pairs of signs. Like Mercury is the messenger of the gods, right? It's about like information and communication, like moving around, delivering messages for the king of the gods, Jupiter, the one who's kind of like looking at the big picture and sort of calling the shots.
Yeah.
They're all mutable signs, which I also find interesting, right? The four mutable signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces are all ruled by Mercury and Jupiter. So they
Yeah.
both have to do with change, which is what the mutable mode is all about. But again, it's like Mercury is the tiny little details, the everyday changes that you mentioned, and
Mhm.
Jupiter is like making the big moves, right? So
Yeah.
like whether you're really zooming in or zooming out, I think is adjusting that kind of that scope or that lens is often how I connect with thinking about Mercury and Jupiter.
Yeah. Oh, that's really beautiful. I think there's something there about like Jupiter and Mercury both help us keep the story moving. Jupiter,
Mm,
especially, is like, okay, so now you have this experience. What is the meaning you make out of it? And Mercury is, okay, so we had this experience. Let's go back over it and see what we think of it. Like, did we like this? Could it have been done differently? Okay, these are the different options. Like, you can just like go down or up forever. And
mhm.
Mercury is the continual breakdown. Jupiter is the continual build up.
Yes. Ooh.
Definitely, yes, they are like foil characters for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps us understand the signs that they rule, and also the signs that they don't do well in because they are contradictory.
Right, exactly. And this is one thing that's so fascinating about astrology is that everything's so multifaceted. So
Mhm.
yes, Jupiter is debilitated in Gemini. It has a bit of a harder time in Gemini versus in say Sagittarius where it's like the energy of Jupiter and the energy of Sagittarius are very aligned. So it's just like a purer expression. It's like if you're like adding red to red versus if you're adding red to blue or green or some
Yeah.
other color, it's not necessarily a bad color. It's just like a less sort of pure expression of that energy. But if we
Yeah.
start kind of putting these puzzle pieces together and thinking about, okay, we know what Jupiter means, we know what Gemini is all about, what happens when you put Jupiter into Gemini, there are helpful parts of that, right? The planet of expansion and the sign of learning. I mean, I
Mhm.
hope we've all learned a ton of interesting stuff over the last year. I think Gemini really brings this attitude of like, there's always more to know and
Yeah.
learn and discover.
Mhm.
And Jupiter really expanding that sense of learning, that sense of, being able to communicate with each other in a wide variety of ways. And just that curiosity, that beginner's mind that I think about with Gemini, it's a sign that's associated with youthfulness in terms of like, I'm here, I'm just trying to kind of learn how to communicate, how to connect, like how the world works.
Yeah.
So Jupiter has been expanding all of that, which is really beautiful and great. And yet also, we live in an incredibly overstimulating world with media and with technology. I mean, it's constant information overload when you open your social media apps or turn on the news or, just like kind of move through this modern society. And this is something that I struggle with, having a lot of Gemini and Mercury and Virgo in my chart, is like how to manage that overwhelm and that information overload. So that I think is part of the sort of the shadow side, if you will, of having Jupiter and Gemini.
Yeah, there's definitely you're right. There will always be more information. There will always be more to learn or to hear about or discuss. While Jupiter is in Gemini, I think there isn't as much emphasis on discernment of
Mm,
like, is this worth continuing to discuss? Is this worth investing in a conversation about? Is it worth learning? Is it worth retaining? And so there's definitely like this kind of chasing your tail kind of quality, or like goldfish mind of like, um, okay, this piece of information sent me here. I engaged with this and it sent me over there. And like, it's just a full, you're just like constantly just swimming in circles and not necessarily getting anywhere. Yeah, like there's definitely an emphasis with Gemini on the new. And when Jupiter's in Gemini, there will always be new. There will always be one more thing. But none of those one more things ever get fully fleshed out or result in like substantive or satisfying meaning. Jupiter's time in Gemini, I don't think has presented us with a lot of satisfying conclusions for what
mm,
has been presented. I do believe though, it definitely has um, presented the concept that nobody else is going to make the boundary for you of
mm,
when it's time to stop, or like when it's
mm.
time to say that's enough. I've heard enough. I've seen enough today. Thank you so much. Good night. Like
Yeah.
um
Ooh, yeah.
there's wisdom there, but it's through this kind of crunchy experience of like, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so overstimulated, I don't know, my eyes are bugging out of my head because there's so much to look at. I honestly, okay, this might be personal to me, but there's something very uh grocery store about Jupiter and Gemini.
Mhm,
I have
mhm.
a really hard time grocery shopping. I find it very overstimulating, very overwhelming. There's so much noise, there's so much to look at. There are so many options to consider. Like, I know I want this one thing. There are 45 versions of it. And like, okay, so do I look at it by price? Do I look at it by quality? Do I look up the reviews of what other people do? I ask somebody like, hey, what do you think? Like,
Mhm.
the abundance of options can become very overwhelming
Yes.
with Jupiter and Gemini.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point, and that grocery store analogy is such a good one. And I think we'd be remiss here if we didn't kind of mention the way that having Jupiter and Gemini plays into this like capitalist system that we're all forced to live within,
Mhm.
that thrives on novelty, which is such a huge Gemini characteristic that you just mentioned, right? It's all about like there always has to be something new to buy, something new to spend your money on or consume or whatever in,
Yeah.
what we know is a very unsustainable way. But I think that's a tricky thing that Jupiter really expands in Gemini, is like kind of always like wanting that sense of novelty, having trouble kind of prioritizing like, okay, what do you when is enough enough? What do you actually want to go
Yeah.
with? How do you set those boundaries? That's something that once we start talking a bit more about Jupiter going into Cancer, we'll get more into boundaries. We'll get more into like prioritizing from a more heart-centered place rather than this very scattered all over the place energy of Gemini. Because
Totally.
another issue there is that like Gemini is the sign of truth, but also lies, right? Information and also misinformation. And having Jupiter and Gemini can be so overwhelming and confusing because it's like, what's true? Which of these pieces of news is accurate? Which of these cereal brands at the grocery store is the best one for me? It's
Right.
it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about so the time that Jupiter has been in Gemini, summer to summer, last summer to this summer. How have we seen it kind of tell its story, its stories in our lives? Because with Gemini, there's always going to be more than one story, of course.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah, just to kind of give a sense of like, how can these symbols show up in just a person's life?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's been a pretty big year because I'm a Gemini rising. My
Oh
ascendant is at
yeah.
1 degree of Gemini. Woo! So I've had
Ooh.
Jupiter in my first house, the house of self, the beginning of my chart, which is generally considered to be a pretty kind of like opportune time. You've got the planet of luck and abundance like on your front doorstep,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I have not only a Gemini rising, I also have Mars in Gemini and my South Node in Gemini. So Jupiter's really been activating a lot of parts of my chart. And in classic Gemini fashion, it's both been a very difficult year where I've been continuing to deal with like mental health stuff and physical health stuff. And I mean, just living in the world that we're all living in right now. But it's also brought a lot of opportunities for me. Jupiter really has been sort of like expanding and overhauling my life.
Yeah.
I started my business, my astrology practice, during this time of Jupiter being in Gemini. I'm about to move now, right as Jupiter is leaving Gemini. In terms of like friendships and social connections, that's an area of my life that I've really been overhauling and expanding, including getting to know you, Magdalene, which has been so awesome,
Hey,
getting to
Ethan.
connect with really cool people.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jupiter's really brought kind of this sense of like vitality and energy into my life that I really have been kind of missing over the last few
Mm.
years. As well as I think expanding my natural tendency towards like curiosity and wanting to learn more, and kind of, connect with my local community and sort of revamp like just the little mundane routines of my life.
Sure.
Um, but that's one of the things I think is really beautiful about Gemini and having Jupiter there is that, whatever changes we want to make, however we want to grow, you can always learn. Especially in this day and age, information is so accessible and so is
Yeah.
misinformation. But anything you want to learn about, it's pretty easy to access that information on the internet now.
Yeah.
And especially in this moment where things are pretty dire in the world and we're all engaged in this collective project of like reimagining, okay, we know the current systems don't work. How do we need to change? What do we want? Like, how do we figure
Yeah.
out how to do the things that we're trying to do? There's a lot of learning that needs to happen. So I've been experiencing that in my life, and I know that's a bigger theme going on. But Magdalene, you have Gemini in a totally different part of your chart, not in the first house. So I'm curious to hear
Very
how
true.
you've been experiencing this over the last year.
Interestingly, we are both air sign risings. So we're both little
Oh,
geniuses. We're both
huh?
little smarty pants, which I love.
Love that
And I
for
think it's
us.
part of why we get along very
Mhm.
well.
Absolutely.
So for me, Gemini rules my fifth house, the part of my chart that has to do with um, enjoyment, your hobbies, like children, if you have them, sex and pleasure. For me, I thought it was really interesting. So Jupiter is debilitated natally in my chart. It's in a different sign, it's in Virgo, but the experience of having a debilitated Jupiter became very uh loud in
Mhm.
my experience, the experience of um focusing on the details so hard that you can never make anything of them. They fail to grow. I pretty quickly after Jupiter entered Gemini got this like compulsive interest in documenting my life and
Hmm.
keeping track of what I was spending my time doing. And so my calendar app from the last like year, it's definitely calmed down now because there did come a point where it was like, this is not sustainable. Like this is actually a little much. But there was such an interest in, so I was documenting what I was doing. When friends would tell me what they were up to, I would document that. When news stories came up that I thought were like relevant or significant. And part of this is because when Jupiter entered Gemini, I got really serious about um, tracking astrology in a way that I hadn't before. I've been practicing for years. Um, the enjoyment of it really ramped up once Jupiter entered my house of like the things you like to do. One of the things I love to do is learn Gemini and talk. I love learning, I love talking. And so as Jupiter was making this transit, the enjoyment of learning peaked, so did my need to start communicating what I'd been spending all of this time learning kind of in secret. Like all my friends knew I was super into astrology, but I started making content and actually like sharing my ideas and perspectives on this practice through TikTok. Like I actually like, which is Gemini is very like social media coded.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
share with us, share with the class what's going on in here.
Mhm.
um, so definitely there was a lot of that. I also noticed now this is more on like the positive side. Jupiter brought this like opportunity for wisdom and growth to my experience with how fast my thoughts were racing. Like
Mm.
definitely that expansion of Gemini energy of like frenzied, like, let's think about it, let's talk about it more, more, more. Jupiter, for me at least, provided an opportunity, like I said earlier, to say, like, this is not a train I want to be on anymore.
Mm.
And like starting to think of trains of thought as actual trains if I'm like in a station or something. Like the opportunity is there to get on that train of thought. The opportunity is also always there to say, like, I don't want to be on this train anymore. It's not actually helping me in this moment. I can get on it later if I want to. um and like certainly there's something to be said for needing to do that multiple times of like, okay, I got off the train half an hour ago and now I'm back on it and that's okay. We're getting off of it again. Like, I don't know, just something about like actually visualizing my thoughts that way was low key kind of helpful and like offered this opportunity for like a spiritual level of growth, which is very Jupiter coded, is like bring the wisdom, bring the higher learning, the like what is your philosophy on the idea of having thoughts kind
Yeah.
of like what do they how do they serve you, what are they there for? So that was all very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool to hear the way that you're kind of putting those pieces together. Yeah, that idea of like how do you kind of change your thoughts, right? That mutable Jupiter and Gemini idea, but Jupiter also being one of the symbols of authority in astrology. Like how do you have authority and like kind of take control over your own mind? Which,
Wow.
girl, if I could tell you how many times I tried to jump off and on that freaking train at the train
I
station.
know. I know. It's hard. Well, we're thinkers. We be
Yes.
thinking.
Totally. And part of that might be the fact that we both have, Jupiter as well as our suns in Virgo, where, Virgo
Mhm.
does, as another mercurial sign, kind of have this desire to keep track. And I also do a lot of keeping track of like how I spend my time and how I spend my money and just like trying to kind of like organize like all these chaotic pieces of mercurial information.
Yeah.
And I guess part of that also maybe, having Jupiter debilitated in Virgo in our birth charts is like Virgo isn't necessarily the most self-confident sign. And Jupiter being a planet that has a lot to do with confidence, that can be an area of life that's kind of tricky where it's like Virgo
Yeah.
really wants to have control over things and Jupiter has to do with this like faith and kind of surrender to the universe that can be kind of hard to put those pieces together. Don't want to dive too far down, the rabbit hole. We could talk about our birth charts forever. But one positive side, I think, to having that kind of, mindset of wanting to keep track of things and all the amazing, like, kind of mental work that you've done over the last year with Jupiter and Gemini is that you're very well informed about like current events and news and all the things that have happened in the world that correspond to Jupiter and Gemini. So I'd love to hear you take us through just kind of a brief overview. Of course, there are a million things you could talk about.
Yeah.
So like give us some juicy examples that you've been pondering around like what does this look like not only in our individual lives but out there in the world.
Yeah. I want to start off with it's actually an example that's not purely Jupiter in Gemini. It has to do with the transition from Jupiter in Taurus, which was like summer, I guess, of 2024, it would have been ending.
Yes, right.
And it entered, and so okay, so that's last summer. Okay, that makes
Mhm.
sense. As Jupiter was moving from Taurus into where it's more of like kind of a neutral, it's not like heavily dignified from a Hellenistic standpoint, but it's also not debilitated, or like in detriment where it is in Gemini. That movement from Taurus into Gemini, a news story that really grabbed my attention was Scarlett Johansson came forward and filed a lawsuit against OpenAI, for stealing her voice. She said that they had come to her and requested that she work with them, to provide her voice for like an AI tool that they were developing. She said no. They went ahead and made that AI tool, and it sounded just like her. So this idea of, and what really grabbed my attention was the emphasis on the voice. Both Taurus and Gemini have something to say about our voices. Taurus is more the like physical side. It's like your actual, it represents the throat, having like a pleasing sounding voice, and like the sound of someone's voice is very Taurian. Gemini is the content of what they're saying. Does it make sense? Do we agree with it? Is it like coherent? And this interesting situation where Jupiter becomes debilitated and someone is saying my voice is being taken without my permission to create content and say things that I would never say. And certainly Gemini, as Jupiter has been in Gemini, it has given us so many stories and moments that have to do with generative AI. Gemini being, and Jupiter for sure being like a generative planet that like spreads and creates, and like proliferates ideas and things. And Gemini just like also being a multiplier, that like the growth we're seeing, it's not linear, it's like, or it's exponential. You know what I mean? Like it's not like a consistent growth, it's proliferation times proliferation. And with that, again, Jupiter being coherence, and like higher meaning, the fact that AI right now is not, it's not actually about making sense. It's not about being coherent. It's about being present. It's about existing at all. We can generate anything you could ever want. We could generate 6 different versions of the same thing that you want. Doesn't mean that they're going to make sense. Like it doesn't mean that AI has gotten to a point where it is, and it almost kind of feels like the people who are developing and like honing these tools don't necessarily care about it making sense. That's not the priority. Again, the priority is the proliferation, not the meaning behind it. We also think about like the Trump administration, the current like governmental leadership here in the United States, using this strategy of, I'm going to bury you in paperwork, I'm going to bury you in information. Whether it's true does not matter. It's that I'm going to waste your time. I'm going to throw this at the wall. Oh, that didn't stick. No worries. I'm throwing these other 14 things at the wall. Like there is, and so again, we come back to this like chasing your tail quality of like trying to keep up with the harm that's being done, or at least being threatened to be done, which is represents real harm. And like there are real people who are impacted by these ideas that are being shared. But tomorrow they're going to act like, no, I never said that. And if I did, you mistook it, like you misunderstood it. Right. Gemini is very, very slippery like that. And Donald Trump, especially being a Gemini sun.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even remember the statistic because it changes every day, but I mean, the number of times that he's just straight up lied on the record, and the pervasiveness of misinformation and disinformation now that, you know, he's intentionally throwing out, that other people are intentionally throwing out, And it's also like mushrooming and proliferating in this very Gemini kind of way, because a lot of people are just, like parroting things that they've heard that they don't know whether they're true. Like,
Mm.
arguably, we're all kind of getting worse at critical thinking and fact checking and like all of these, really kind of basic media skills. So yeah, there's been a lot going on with all of that. And I really like, well, I don't like, I hate all of this, but but I think you made a good point about like the point is to distract and to waste time, because I think that's one of the biggest issues with Gemini is like running around in circles, wasting so much time and energy and being so distracted because you can't prioritize. Like all the information is interesting, everything looks the same. It's this like multiplicity that's associated with Gemini, and it's just a very very sloppy energy.
Mhm.
But I think also a lot of the really kind of dangerous qualities of this that you've been describing, like going back to the whole AI conversation, we can also link to the fact that the planet Pluto is now in Aquarius. Aquarius being a sign that's associated with technology and innovation and the future and society. And then Pluto being a planet that's associated with death and rebirth and transformation and destruction, and power and control and lies and secrets and deep
Wow.
truths. So that also is kind of like, fueling this fire, fanning the flames of technology advancing in a way that is really powerful, but really scary and really dangerous, and oftentimes at odds with the more kind of, noble revolutionary goals of Aquarius, actually like caring
Mhm.
about human rights and wanting to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
What a radical idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a taste of how some of, these transits actually like are playing out in the world.
Yeah. One more, I want to like jump off a point that you made about the idea of like bad faith communication, that like
Mhm.
it's just it's just lies. It's just misinformation that they can couch later as miscommunication, but it's not. Um, Jupiter being the planet that represents good faith, that like
Mm.
honest honesty and like honest consideration of
Mhm.
what someone who disagrees with you is saying, and
Mhm.
how Jupiter being in this space that it doesn't do very well in, being bad
Yeah.
faith arguments, bad faith communication that is not even like really safe to engage with in some ways.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
all it serves to do is platform something that, again, discernment doesn't necessarily deserve to be platformed.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that's, yeah, been very interesting and high key disheartening
Yeah.
to witness over the past year. And part of the reason I'm so excited for Jupiter to be in a more empowered space, I want to see how we can recover, how we can like learn from this time and not repeat it, please.
Yeah, hopefully we can actually learn, having the planet of expansion and the sign of learning for a whole year. Hopefully we actually learned something, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can actually figure out what those important lessons were amidst all of the bullshit.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that a little bit with Cancer in a moment. But before we do, there are a couple kind of big transits or like relationships that Jupiter made to other planets while it's been moving through Gemini, that also connect to some of the current events that you've been talking about. So do you want to walk us through
Yeah,
some of
yeah. I
those?
had another kind of like more pop culture related news story that I found. This was while Mars was conjunct Jupiter. So Mars is known as a malefic planet. It brings situations and experiences that are a little more difficult
Mhm.
for humans. That's not to say that they should never happen. Mars represents things like cutting, severing, burning. It's like the warrior planet. And so the idea of like warfare or fighting for yourself or others to get what you need, that's Mars. It can definitely be, it can reflect kind of malicious intent or just like harmful experiences. Um, and one thing that happened while Mars was in Gemini, so was Jupiter. Mars came up and met Jupiter in a conjunction. This was August of last year. and the movie It Ends With Us had come out. And there was so much drama surrounding the main like figures, the main actors who were in this movie, Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and also to some extent Colleen Hoover, who like wrote the book that this movie was based on. We now have a lot more information than we did then. At that point in time, though, it was just such somebody like took it and ran with it. It was like everywhere on social media, and it was just getting so much coverage that like Blake Lively had no real interest in like the actual themes that this book covers, or and that she's like mean to people in interviews, just all of these. It was almost like death by a thousand cuts, all of these like kind of small by themselves issues that people had just became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it truly was like a gossip fueled character assassination. Blake Lively had a terrible summer last summer. I mean, I don't know what her personal life was like, but publicly it was not, it was harmful. And so we think about Mars being kind of insidious and harmful through a Gemini lens. I'm going to gossip about you. I'm going to tell everybody how horrible you are. And Jupiter, touching Jupiter, Jupiter's just going to make it all louder. Jupiter's just going to make it all bigger. So again, Jupiter has these really positive significations. It doesn't, but there are some things you don't want to get bigger. There are some things you don't want spreading. And for Blake Lively, at least, this would have been one of them. So I thought that was a really interesting manifestation of the different symbols. We also, since around the same time, actually, last August, have been experiencing squares between Jupiter in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces. This is happening 3 times. It's happened twice now. Jupiter and Saturn, being kind of slower moving planets, will often reflect their messages and their communications with each other in more of a collective way, or in a way that has a little less to do, not nothing to do, but a little less to do with our like personal lives and more to do with us all living together collectively. What does it mean to participate in society? What kind of leaders are we looking for? How do we know that they are leaders? What kind of characteristics are they displaying? And also, how does power shift from one person to another, or leadership shift from one person to another? Because we are kind of like in the middle of these 3 squares. We have the first 2, like I said. Both times we had a news story pop up that had to do with the transfer of power in some way. So the first one was August 19th. That was when Joe Biden stepped out of the race, and put forth Kamala Harris to run on the Democratic ticket. And the second square was late December 24th. December was, so this was like a period of time when the president of South Korea declared martial law, or attempted to, and was very quickly rebuked. And like that it didn't work out well for him. He was impeached and I think arrested. I don't think he stayed arrested. I think he's a free man right now. But there were kind of swift consequences for this like attempt to steal more power, versus kind of recognizing and becoming okay with a loss of power, which is more like what Joe Biden was doing. I mean, whether he was okay with it doesn't sound like he was, but I don't know. I wasn't there. But these first 2 squares definitely had a little more to do with, in some way, like losing or releasing power. Um, the third square has yet to happen. It's happening this summer, and it's across two different signs because Jupiter and Saturn have both changed signs at this point. So the tension is maybe similar, the tone is very different. Um, Once we've explained a little more what Jupiter in Cancer is like, or what we anticipate it to be like, we can talk a little more about that third square and maybe like why it's different.
Yeah, that sounds good. But what an awesome summary there. I mean, definitely the way that, Jupiter and Saturn, these more kind of like outer societal planets, really have been involved in these like big power shifts and
Mm.
all this like change around boundaries also that's been happening, having like Saturn, the planet of boundaries, in the mutable sign of Pisces, like all these mutable signs, all of this change. And I love that phrase you used earlier about death by 1,000 cuts.
Mm.
Perfect for Jupiter and Mars in Gemini. Like that's great summary of how to explain that. So yeah, there's been a lot going on, and we could go on forever about current events and transits related, but
Mm.
hopefully that gives you all a good sense of what Gemini, Jupiter,
Gemini,
of what Jupiter and
Gemini.
Gemini playing out has been like.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is interesting is that Jupiter and Uranus have kind of been doing this little dance together over the last couple years because they were coexisting together in the sign of Taurus.
Mhm.
Uranus is still in Taurus right now. So for a while, they were both in the same sign of Taurus. Jupiter caught up to Uranus. They were conjunct on, I think it was April 20th, 2024. I think I
That
remember
sounds
it
right.
being on 420 because that was kind of like, haha, it was like this big
Yeah.
thing. It's like, and 420 and the Jupiter conjunction in Taurus.
Yeah.
And then since then, Jupiter moved past Uranus because it moves much more quickly, and has been in Gemini. But the way that I've been thinking about it is that Jupiter is kind of paving the way for Uranus because Uranus is going to be entering Gemini this July. So
Hmm.
Jupiter will leave Gemini, but then Uranus will move into that sign just about a month after and will be there for like 7 years, for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
And we'll probably, maybe we'll make another video about that later. There's a lot to unpack later that we'll
So
talk
much to
about
say.
probably individually and together.
Mhm.
But I do think it's interesting the way that Jupiter has been kind of like, expanding the Gemini field and sort of like creating all of this space and chaos. Because when Uranus, the lord of earthquakes and lightning bolts, gets into Gemini, it's really going to shake things up and it's really going to like make some transformations with the space that's been created. Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius, where Pluto now is. It's a planet very much associated also with like technology and progress and innovation and like humanitarian goals for society. So it's going to
Yeah.
be very interesting to see, kind of looking ahead to Uranus moving into Gemini.
Everything that you just said gave me this image of Jupiter is teeing Uranus up,
Yeah, yeah.
making the ball bigger,
Yes,
easier to
yes.
hit, saying like this is all that's here, and then Uranus is coming in with like a baseball bat and just like knocking it totally away.
Mm-hmm.
um and yeah, so definitely like the idea of like expanding something so that it's easier to shake up or get out or like break free from.
Hell yeah. That's such a good image. Yeah, I love that as a way to kind of relate them. And what's it going to look like when Uranus hits that ball out of the park? We don't know. I mean, truly, with more than any other planet, the motto of Uranus is expect the unexpected. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot of shocks and surprises, even more so coming. I mean, if you thought Jupiter and Gemini was intense, that was just a little aperitif, if you will, to whet
Exactly.
your palate for what Uranus and Gemini is going to be like. So that'll be a whole thing.
Yeah.
But by the time Uranus moves into Gemini in July, Jupiter will have moved into Cancer, which it's doing next week.
Hell
So
yeah.
if we start now thinking about the transition and the sort of divine logic that the zodiac follows, right? The signs are in the order they're in, not just by coincidence. There's a reason why every sign is in the position that it's in. So pretty much every planet, when it's moved through Gemini, it moves into Cancer because Gemini is all about chaos, right? It's all about like so much information and all this like quick scattered energy that's very all over the place. Cancer is like, we need to chill the heck out. We need to
Yeah.
calm down. We need to kind of, withdraw all of these mental tendrils that have expanded all over the place and search now for truth more inwardly rather than outwardly.
Mhm.
Cancer is the sign of the crab, right? And the crab, sometimes also a turtle, I've heard can be a symbol of Cancer, but it's these animals that have these like protective shells that
Yeah.
protect their kind of squishy, vulnerable insides. So this is a sign that has a lot to do with boundaries, and it has a lot to do with that inward journey of feeling our emotions.
Mhm.
Cancer is the cardinal water sign. So cardinal means that it's starting off the season, in this case summer. It has this energy of like taking initiative and getting things started.
Mhm.
And then water signs are all about emotions. So this is all about like, hey, step one, when you have an emotion, feel your feelings.
Yeah.
So simple and obvious. I promise you, especially with the Gemini Mercury heavy chart, that is not necessarily an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Because our emotions are always changing, right? They live not just in the mind, but also in the body. Jupiter is ruled by the moon, which I know you're going to tell us a bit more about in a moment. But yeah, it's all about kind of this balance between like, yes, I need to live out there in the world, but I also need a space where I can feel my feelings, where I can be safe, where I can like have a boundary that allows me to experience my emotional vulnerability. So we're
Mhm.
moving into a much more emotional kind of space now with Jupiter going into Cancer. This is a sign that has to do with family and ancestry and roots and home,
Mhm.
both in the kind of like, family or like the physical sense of home, but also the more emotional. Again, it's like it's the shell that you withdraw into. Like when you're feeling sad and you just need to sob your eyes out, you'd probably rather be safe in your bedroom than like out in public on the street, right? So that's kind of the vibe of Cancer. Is it's about emotions, it's about healing, it's about this inner emotional world that we have.
Mhm.
It's also a sign associated with imagination and creativity, because it's like these fertile waters of our emotions nurture our ability to, do anything creatively in the world. So it's this very quiet, caring, nurturing, creative sign that asks the question, like, where can we be safe to feel and process our feelings? Like every sign, like every symbol in astrology, it also has its risks and its pitfalls. How do you balance that shell? Is it too thin? Is it too thick? Cancers can sometimes be very overly cautious and overly protective of themselves and other people. It can be this very like mama bear kind of energy, which can be really beautiful, but like anything can go too far sometimes. And because Cancer is a sign that has a lot to do with nurturing and caretaking and healing, it's the sign of the mother. And I'm putting that in big air quotes because I personally don't like the way that, astrology insists on gendering everything, but it's this like nurturing, like parenting kind of archetype, right? The big pitfall that you'll often see with Cancer is that rather than actually feeling your own feelings, it's very easy to escape into this healing and nurturing role and to be like, oh, I'm only going to focus on your needs. I'm only going to take care of you. I'm going to deny my own needs and my own emotions. So like every archetype, it can get twisted, right? Gemini is
Yeah.
about both truth and lies. Cancer is about both feeling your feelings and also not feeling them, because it can be kind of scary to feel your feelings.
Yeah.
So that's an introduction to some of the complexity of Cancer.
Yeah, definitely a complex sign. I love what you're saying about like Cancer really demarcates the boundary between home base and like the rest of the world, and this idea of like making actual like physical boundaries. Like I draw my like wall or oh my gosh, like a moat or something. And
Yeah.
Cancer represents like the retreat, the spaces that feel safe and well resourced for us, versus it's kind of a wild card when you go out in the world. Sometimes you have really good experiences, sometimes you have awful experiences. Home or like Cancer is where you are able to like you're from there's a familiarity there, and also an ability to more more openly process and express the results of our experiences, which are
Mm.
our emotions. I think that's really beautiful. From like a Hellenistic standpoint, once again, Cancer is the domicile of the moon. That means that the moon is the ruling planet of the sign of Cancer. And so Cancer gets all of its significations or our understanding of like what Cancer is about. We look to the moon to get a sense. And the moon is constantly in a state of flux. She is capable of experiencing a wide variety of different circumstances, or you could see it as like moods. The moon is very like changeable. And so Cancer, again, being this like fortress where you can have the full range of experiences in a very safe, kind of secluded almost way, is why the moon rules Cancer. The moon is ruling the safe space where the moon can be exactly who she is, no matter what that looks like.
Mm.
And Jupiter is said to be exalted in this sign, Cancer. Again, we think about the idea of a very well-resourced, safe place. If Jupiter is going to go out in the world and create abundance and live up to its potential, which Jupiter has a lot to do with the idea of like reaching your full potential, the way to give Jupiter that best chance of creating that abundance and that growth and that success and that higher meaning is to give it a very safe, well-resourced kind of springboard. I also I think about Cancer a lot through the lens of it being opposite Capricorn, which is a sign that is so devoted to success, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be a capitalistic idea of success. I think that Capricorn has really been co-opted by the capitalists as like, oh, so that success means money, right? It doesn't have to, you know that. Anyway,
Totally agree.
but so in order to give ourselves the best, so Capricorn really is just making it up the cliffside, making it to the top of the mountain and being like, look at what I accomplished. That took almost everything out of me. And I'm proud of myself. That's Capricorn. And again, with Cancer, I think about giving the people you love and yourself the best possible chance to achieve.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I'm really excited for Jupiter being in Cancer. This idea of further understanding and deepening our understanding of what do we need? What do we need for ourselves? What do we need for our communities? The safe space being necessary and being prioritized, our attention or our energy expanding through Jupiter. And what are we attending to? What are we expanding? Safety for ourselves, for our communities. That's the hope. That's my hope for Jupiter in Cancer.
Totally. Yeah, especially at a time when a lot of people's really basic safety, at least in this country and a lot of places in the world, is being threatened for really horrible reasons of like just a few people putting more money in their pockets that they'll never be able to spend. So yeah, this idea of just kind of coming back to basic needs, basic safety, basic like, hey, can we make sure that everybody has food to eat and clean drinking water and a roof over their heads and like, you know, love and community and close bond, like the basic things that we as human beings need to survive and thrive. We're kind of coming from the like, you know, curious exploration and all over the place energy of Gemini to like, let's prioritize on like the basic things that we need to survive and thrive, like watering the roots of the tree. I love how you brought in this Cancer Capricorn comparison, those opposite signs, because Cancer is associated with the fourth house, which is like the bottom, like the root of your chart. And then Cancer or Capricorn is the 10th house, the very top of the chart. So how do you get the tree to grow big and tall and strong and extend its branches out and provide all of this to the community, you got to nurture the roots. You got to water the roots down at the bottom. And that's really what Cancer is all about. I also love this, the like springboard or diving board analogy that you used, because, you know, Cancer is a water sign and Jupiter also rules Pisces, a fellow water sign. Like, it operates on this more emotional, energetic level with like water and fire. It's not naturally oriented towards the air element of Gemini, which is all about thoughts and ideas. And I think we have a culture that very much prioritizes the like intellectual, rational side of things. So Jupiter going into Cancer is such a huge opportunity for us to connect with our hearts, right? This is going to be all about us going inward to our emotions, to healing, to spirituality, connecting with our feelings and our inner truths. And this is where I think like the chaos of the grocery store that you mentioned before,
Yeah.
right? Where Gemini just wants to put all of the options on the table. It wants to go out and like get all the pieces of information and come home and just like dump them out all over the kitchen table and be like, ta-da, I'm done. What the heck do you do at that point, right? This is where with Cancer, we actually use our intuitions and we feel. We use our hearts to prioritize, and where we figure out how to nurture ourselves and reclaim our energy. Like, how do I calm down? How do I feel my feelings? How do I process all of the information and experience that we just got with this last year of Jupiter and Gemini? How do I deal with the overwhelm of living in this wild world? And a really big one that I think we need to mention here is like, if you're connecting with your heart and you have any idea what the heck is going on right now in so many parts of the world, in this country and in other places, grief. Grief is a big emotion, sadness and rage. There's so much processing that we need to do. If you're paying attention and you're tuned into your heart, like, you're not going to survive unless you're able to process and nurture and regenerate and work with your emotions. So I think that's going to be a big theme of Jupiter going into Cancer over the next year or so. And I think that like claiming that space to feel, to heal, that kind of intimacy also of these close, like family-like bonds that Cancer represents, claiming those things is a revolutionary act. Like, capitalism and the powers that be don't want you to feel. They don't want you to heal. They don't want you to like be supported in your safe home space. I mean, we can tell by how totally uninterested our government is in connecting all of the people who need housing with all of the housing units that are available. It's not that we don't have what we need, it's that we're refusing to give people what they need.
Yeah.
So I think the extent to which we can claim that, and to also like work with our boundaries, work with that crab's shell, right? It's like, what kind of labor are you willing to do in this capitalist structure? Like, how can you balance emotional vulnerability with protecting yourself and those you care about, and all of these questions of safety? Yeah, this is all going to be, I think, even more relevant with Jupiter going into Cancer next week.
Definitely. And the answer being boundaries of
Mhm.
like Gemini, there's always going to be the chatter. There's always going to be the threat. Uh, I think in order to prioritize our communities and ourselves, there needs to be that boundary is essential. That like, damn, that's crazy. You're taking healthcare away from millions of people who need it. Anyway, we are setting up a free series of workshops where we provide medical training to anybody who wants to show up and learn. Like this idea of setting a boundary away from all of the like fear that could really imprison you, and like you will be stuck there forever. You absolutely could. We're like, now we have to create the fortress. Now we have to like, I think in a lot of ways, the time has like come and gone to try to reason or to use like more Gemini kinds of like, let's talk it out strategies. If there's no interest in reasonable discussions, in good faith discussions, the next step is to create places where that good faith is safe to be built, right? Like, that's where we're at as far as I can See?
100%, 100%. Yeah, and it's interesting too, considering what that looks like, what community and family looks like. I mean, the way that the right and white supremacists and Christian nationalists are so obsessed with this very narrow, limited definition of the nuclear family, and that like being the root of society, and anything that attacks that, like people being queer or trans or whatever, it's like, oh, you're like attacking this really important institution at the root of our society. That's so limited, that's so narrow, that's so restrictive, that like basically nobody actually freaking fits into.
Yeah.
And that's where I always, when I'm working with astrology, make a point of talking about family in a very expansive way, right? It's like sometimes your chosen family is way closer to you and more supportive of you than your blood family, right? So I think
Yeah.
with Cancer, we're talking about any of these like close supportive bonds of, maybe you live together under one roof, or you're just like very, in this emotional support network with each other. But this is the kind of thing that I think more and more of us are realizing. And I've been on this journey too, being raised in this very hyper individualistic culture, and just thinking of myself as being an individual who's so separate from others, like struggling with loneliness, struggling with disempowerment, struggling with feeling hopeless. Cause like, well, what can little old me do in the face of, climate change and all of these huge issues? But I think like, more and more realizing it's about community, it's about organizing, it's about people power, it's about like building these relationships of emotional and practical support. That's what's going to take us through. We need
Yeah.
that to survive, because more and more of us are waking up out of the illusion that our government is going to protect us or help us, or honestly do anything other than exploit us as much as it
Yeah.
possibly can at this point.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. You were never supposed to do it alone. Like
Yep.
that's actually the point.
Yep.
And kind of circling back almost to the idea of Cancer as the domicile of the moon, where you can be all of the different sides of yourself and that you are safe to do that, I think is like a huge key factor of what it actually means to be in community. Um, the the truth is we are all going to be bringing different sides of the moon.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we are changeable creatures. We are dynamic, multifaceted humans.
Mhm.
And so I think there could be a trap with okay, we all need to show up, and that means showing up exactly like this, and anything
Right.
else is bad and you get out. Like you don't get to have a group that way. You don't actually
Yeah.
get to have community that way.
Ooh. Ooh.
Um and I also, Cancer having so much to do with family.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of a shadow side of that is as Jupiter is transiting this sign, absolutely, I'm expecting that there's going to be very, very loud voices using the idea of what a family should be, and the idea of like safety through the like family unit that is very, like you said, it's a very narrow understanding and definition of what a family is supposed to look like and the roles that different members of that family are meant to or are like biologically predisposed to
Mhm.
fill.
Mhm.
Um, I I think that conversation gets louder as Jupiter is transiting Cancer. The the idea of like who is who is the mother, and
Mhm.
how do we know that's a mother, and what is the role of a mother? Well, the role of the mother traditionally is to stay home, keep the home safe, and produce babies, reproduce. Definitely, I've heard other astrologers make the incredible point that if Jupiter is proliferation and Cancer is like the womb or like the safe kind of gestational place a little bit,
Mhm.
um, Jupiter plus Cancer equals baby boom, or
Right.
just like everybody's going to be pregnant. And I think that is a really good point and a very like literal idea of what Jupiter in Cancer can represent. I also think that there is a like broader conversation that could be had about what is a family and what is a community. I'm hoping that there will be a level of healing through some of those conversations, but it goes either way. You know, there are beautiful manifestations and really insidious ones. So, and we'll probably see both.
Really. Absolutely. Yeah, the baby boom point is so interesting because I think under the best of circumstances, I totally could see that happening. And I guess maybe there could be some sort of like forced baby boom because,
I mean, they're
of
literally
all of the
offering people money.
exactly right. And
Sorry,
also
go
just, I
ahead.
mean, all of the limitations to bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom and not allowing people to get abortions and
Mhm.
stuff, right? It's like, okay, it's like basically like forcing people to have kids.
Yeah.
I mean, under the best of circumstances, in a society where we're really committed to everybody's well-being on a systemic level, there could be a natural baby boom just because people have the resources. People who want to have kids don't have to look at their bank account and be like, I can barely support myself right now. I can barely pay gas to get to work. What the heck is my kids' college tuition going to cost in 20 years from now? Right? There's so many ways that we actually make it, especially in the US, so hard for parents and people who might want to be kind of going in that direction.
Yeah.
But again, I think, yeah, there's so many forms that this can take. Like Cancerian creativity can be the literal creation of children, and like the Cancerian waters being like the waters of the womb and that safe, like, gestational place that you mentioned. But there's so many other different ways to be creative, right? Like a
Yeah.
family can look like this traditional idea of like a white picket fence nuclear family, but there are a million different ways for a family to look. And I think part of the transition from Gemini into Cancer is like turning your friends and your neighbors into your chosen family, right? Like
Beautiful point.
that
Yes.
deepening, because I think that a lot of the resilience, which is a keyword of Jupiter that we brought up,
Mhm.
a lot of human resilience comes out of our diversity, our creativity, our ability to change. Having so many different kinds of people who operate in different ways, who can all like work together, like you said, like all the different phases of the moon. That's such a perfect analogy. That's how we're going to weather this huge storm that we have coming.
Yeah.
Because I think, yeah, a lot of this, like the sort of perfectionism that gets in the way of building close relationships and community building. And this is where I, as an evolutionary astrologer, connect it back to the nodes. Having the
Yes.
South Node in Virgo shows that right now, the collective assignment is to release perfectionism and criticism and these like unattainable standards, which essentially are tools of white supremacy and capitalism and imperialism and hyper-individualism, and embracing that compassion and forgiveness and love that's symbolized by Pisces, where the North Node is, a water sign just like Cancer. So I can see the North Node in Pisces and Jupiter in Cancer kind of amplifying each other, where it's like
Yeah.
we're able to integrate more of the forgiveness and the tolerance and the adaptability to be able to build communities, to be able to build close relationships, to be able to build these like, mutual aid networks where we'll actually help each other survive through everything that's
Yes.
going on. And also, really thinking about the very vulnerable populations that are getting so affected by everything that's happening now. Like talking about a baby boom, I think of the baby boomer generation getting older now and like needing
Needing
a
care.
lot of caretaking, right? Like our elderly care situation is such a freaking mess. Like we
Oh,
really
yeah.
need an overhaul of the way that we view caretaking in our society. Like the question of parenthood that we were just talking about, people with disabilities, that's a huge question now. Everything from like all of RFK's autism registry, just nightmare fuel bullshit, to like the pandemic and the way that COVID has disabled so many people and people dealing with long COVID and, this like ongoing issue of disability justice.
Mhm.
This is something that is relevant to all of us. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm not old or I'm not disabled or I'm not a parent or, none of this has anything to do with me.
Mhm.
Okay, even if you're perfectly healthy right now, how long do you think that's going to last?
Right. That's a
Eventually, you're going to
temporary.
either be disabled or elderly or dead.
Or
So
both.
this
Yeah.
is going
Yeah.
to end up affecting
Yeah.
you in some way.
Very appropriate that you bring up COVID specifically, because as we're experiencing these multiple squares between Jupiter and Saturn, way back in 2020, when they met up, they were in the same place in the zodiac in Aquarius. I think it was actually 0 degrees Aquarius. That was when COVID became like entered like the public stage, and the news was actually covering it. Took them a while, but like that was when it became a real game changer in terms of like our day-to-day lived experience. Aquarius, the sign where these two met up, has so much to do with the collective and the power of the people. And now we're experiencing this opening square back and forth. And this one that's happening this summer, this third square that's happening on June 15th, across Cancer and Aries, where the previous two were across Gemini and Pisces. Again, these mutable signs having to do with like giving something up. And then I think that this square, I'm looking for opportunities to initiate or claim some kind of power. And especially with Jupiter being in Cancer, where it is so upheld and so like on top of its game and well resourced. Again, I'm really hoping that there are some opportunities here for us to choose community care versus Saturn in Aries being very individualistic, and that there's a limit now. Saturn is in Aries. There is a limit to how far you're going to get if all you're looking out for is you. You know what I mean?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah, this third square, and with Neptune there too, this like again, it's individualism is a fantasy. It's a dream. This idea of the rugged individualist, the cowboy, the like rootin' tootin', I don't need anybody else. I'll get my own. And if you can't do the same, you're the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was never real. It was always a lie.
Yes.
And so Saturn meeting Neptune are coming very close. They don't technically meet until next year, but they're edging us. Like
yeah.
it's
really, yeah.
they're so close. And Jupiter kind of highlighting the limitations of that way of thinking and of that way of viewing the world that you live in versus, hey, there's an opportunity here. It's not going to look the way that you thought it was, but here's where the energy is right now. Here's where the growth is available to you. Do you want to take it? Like that's kind of how I'm seeing this third square.
Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah. I mean, the way that things are shifting now, we still have the square as you've described that's been going on for a while. But now that Saturn's in Aries and Neptune's in Aries, Jupiter is going to be squaring both of those planets from another sign. The other body we have right now in Aries is Chiron, which is way later in the sign. So the square between Jupiter in Cancer and Chiron and Aries will come later on in this year-long period of Jupiter being in Cancer. But there again are a lot of good and bad potentials here, right? I think like a lot of us have just really gone through a pretty big spiritual awakening over the last 14-ish years of Neptune being in Pisces. And a lot of these like illusions of individualism that you're talking about are kind of starting to fall apart. And I think part of that has to do with us just learning more information. I mean, as a Gemini rising, that's how it's happened for me, is like I just learned more facts and heard more stories and talked to more people where I'm like, oh yeah, a lot of the like materialistic illusions I had about this world are wrong. And now I know that. And I've changed my mind, right? The beauty of Gemini.
Yes. Jupiter and Gemini having nothing but examples for us is so good. Like, oh, you don't believe me the first time? That's okay. I've got 167 other ways that I can show this truth to you. Is very Jupiter and Gemini.
Yeah, totally. And then, thinking about the other kind of bigger structural pieces of the puzzle. I mean, Pluto, again, recently moved from Capricorn into Aquarius at the end of last year. The United States just had its first Pluto return, its first like 248-year Pluto cycle. which just so fascinatingly happens to correspond to the average lifespan of an empire. Does it feel to you like this empire is kind of crumbling in its death throes? Because it kind of does to me, you know? So, like, a lot of our illusions have kind of started dissolving around, like, this country and this culture of individualism and materialism. But a lot of people are still clinging to those illusions really hard. And that's a risk of Jupiter in Cancer that I've heard some people raise before. It might have been Jessica Lanyadoo, I think, was the first person who mentioned this that I remember, is that Cancer being a sign associated with home and family, Jupiter expanding that could lead to kind of like an uptick in nationalism, which unfortunately, with the ongoing rise of global fascism, is already something that we're seeing.
Mhm.
And then with Saturn and Aries, you know, yeah, that hyper individualism you mentioned, there's kind of this risk of like a zero sum game mentality where it's like we have to be in conflict and competition, and I have to get mine so that you don't get yours because there isn't enough for all of us, which is bullshit. There is enough for
Yeah.
all of us. And
Yeah.
it's that's this kind of thing of like, well, it's only about my family and my loved ones, and I have to defend my home and get everything I need so that I'll be set, and I don't care about other people. That is part of the risk here.
Yeah.
And especially given the fact that Neptune, a planet of spirituality and religion, is in the kind of conflict oriented sign of Aries now, is like giving crusade vibes, basically, right? Where this like
Yeah.
Christian nationalist project to make the US into a like legally Christian country, which it was never supposed to be according to the founding fathers or freaking anybody,
Mm.
could get potentially amplified by Jupiter in Cancer. So that's kind of the shadow side,
Wow.
but there's also the more beneficial possibility that we could use this transit to embrace more compassion. And that's what I'm hoping, because when Jupiter's in Cancer, it'll be making a trine to the North Node in Pisces, a fellow water sign. It'll be making a sextile, a stimulating aspect to the South Node in Virgo. So I'm hoping that it's going to help us to unpack a lot of this collective baggage we have around these issues of like perfectionism and control versus compassion, to actually create a society where all of us can thrive and not like 0.001% of people.
Right. I love the word that you used to describe the sextile as stimulating. I've never heard that before. Can you talk a little more about like just sextiles and like what they mean to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I want to unpack a little bit more of the technical aspects here.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here is when planets make certain relationships to each other because they're a certain number of degrees apart. So with the sextile, two planets or 2 points or bodies are approximately 60 degrees apart. And that's a stimulating aspect where they kind of amp each other up, you know, like they kind of fan the flames. Or in
Hmm.
this case, with the water sign of Cancer and the earth sign of Virgo, it's like they kind of like mix together in this like muddy mixture. They kind of like meld with each other.
Yeah.
The other aspect that I mentioned there is the trine, which happens between the signs that are of the same element. So Cancer and Pisces are both water signs. So if we have Jupiter in Cancer and the North Node in Pisces, there's a flow. The trine is a very harmonious aspect where it's like they're on the same page, they get each other. They're not the same sign, but they're both water signs. They're both operating from a place of prioritizing like emotions and healing and spirituality and everything that the water element represents.
Yeah.
So long story short, Jupiter is making this very like harmonious, flowy, stimulating kind of relationship to the lunar nodes while it's in Cancer that I'm hoping we can utilize to actually further our collective spiritual evolution, which, you know, is what the nodes represent.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for explaining that.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course. There was something about the idea of Jupiter and Cancer being um, the motherland, like this very
Mm,
fascist idea of like, okay, somehow we're going to have a united community of people who don't care about each other because to care about each other is wrong, or like do you see how that doesn't make well, it doesn't make sense to me.
yeah,
um
it does make sense.
and again, like the contradiction of like Aries and Cancer, the united, the like the group, um versus the individual kind of, and that like, okay, that means that our group has to be expansive enough to allow people to be individuals.
Yes. Ooh,
um
yeah.
without trying to like hone down their identity to like 1 to 3 identifiers or like a role. I don't want to play a role. I want to be a person. And like
Yes.
the
Mm.
community has to have enough space and flexibility and like depth to be able to accommodate that.
Hell
And if
yeah.
it doesn't, but you're also like, yeah, the math ain't mathin'.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was so beautiful though how you brought those pieces together where Jupiter is the expansiveness,
Mhm.
Cancer is like the family, and then Aries is this, like the sign of the self, this more, kind of individualistic part of us, you could say. And I think one of the pitfalls of Cancer is being reduced to a role where, like, you see your mother not as a human being, but just as the mother who, like, cleans up
Oh,
after you, that kind of
yeah,
stereotype, right? And I think that that's going to be a huge theme of Jupiter and Cancer is balancing challenge because we are going to need to challenge ourselves, right? Like, and I think this square between Saturn and Jupiter represents that, where it's like, who has power? Who's going to claim power? Who's going to take initiative, right? Who's going to actually like use their will to shape the world that we live in? Very like Saturn and Neptune and Aries kind of
totally.
stuff. But in order to do that, in order to sustain ourselves and not burn out immediately, which is kind of an Aries problem sometimes,
Mhm.
we have to take care of ourselves, right? It's the whole like you can't pour from an empty cup self-care
Mhm.
conversation that's feeling already so trite, but I'm hoping that that can be really like reimagined and expanded in a more beneficial and less individualistic, more community care oriented way.
Please. Yes.
Because like we need to sustain ourselves for the long haul ahead. I think that's a
Mhm.
big theme of a lot of these transits that are all shifting right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Cool. So we've unpacked a lot with Jupiter and Gemini and Jupiter and Cancer and other relevant transits. A note we wanted to kind of end on, though, is to help people to understand a little bit more how this is going to affect them personally. How do you
Mhm.
connect your life with all of these big archetypes and movements in the stars and in the human collective?
Yeah.
We're not going to go through and talk about every single sign because that would just be way too much, but I can just mention that the Cancer part of your birth chart is about to have the cosmic magnifying glass of Jupiter on it. So
Mhm.
maybe you have your sun in Cancer, maybe your moon or your ascendant or some other planets in Cancer. That part of you is about to get magnified, amplified, expanded for better and or for worse, right? It's about to get a lot of this Jupiterian energy coming into that part of yourself, that part of your life.
Mhm.
But a really cool way that astrology allows us to look at different parts of our lives is through the houses. The zodiac's divided up into 12 different signs, but your birth chart is divided up into 12 different houses representing different areas of your life. We shared a bit about our experiences with the fifth house and the first house in Gemini in the beginning. So yeah, Magdalene, do you want to start to kind of walk us through like if somebody's about to have Jupiter in their first or second or third house, just a couple keywords of what part
Yeah.
of their life will be expanded?
Definitely. So Jupiter in the first, so that would mean that you're a Cancer rising or that Cancer rules your first house, is going to be certainly an expansion of your understanding of who you are, what you want to be doing with your life, and how you can make your life and your relationship with yourself feel meaningful.
Mm,
Um,
hell yeah.
so Jupiter entering Cancer in your second house would very literally be like an expansion of your resources. I also, with the hell yeah, with the second house, I also think a lot about what you offer, the gifts that you have,
Mm,
whether you know about them or are in touch with them or not. Jupiter is going to make what you have to offer so apparent to you and grab your attention and say like, hey, you're ready to share. Jupiter is a very generous planet. And so in the second house, I think about like, you have more than you need. Share it, you know? And then third house would be like your immediate circumstances, your neighborhood, or just the people that you see and the places you go every day. Could be your car, or like the vehicle that you use, or how you're traveling in like a short distance way. And then I also think about third house being the house of communication.
Mhm, mhm.
Jupiter kind of creating really expansive communication. Maybe you have a lot to say, write it down, speak it. This is your time to share what's going on for you, like mentally, with Jupiter in the third.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree with all of that so far. And y'all might notice that that sounds a little bit similar to our conversation about Jupiter and Gemini, because
Mhm.
Gemini is the third sign. So it resonates with the third house. So if you happen to have Cancer in the third house in your birth chart, then there will be a bit of a continuation of that theme of expanding communication and connection with your local
Mhm.
community. But enlivened by the motivations and values and priorities of Cancer, which, as we've dissected, are very different from those of Gemini. But if you have Cancer in the fourth house of your birth chart, that is associated with the fourth sign of Cancer. So that is the house of home and family and roots and ancestry, your connection to the land, your connection to your inner emotional world. So if you have Cancer in the fourth house, Jupiter is just going to like it's again that idea of purity, right? You're adding like blue to blue. It's like just a
Mm.
very like pure, clean kind of Cancer energy that Jupiter will be expanding. But then you might have Cancer in the fifth house, which is a house that has a lot to do with creative expression, matches very well with that creative energy of Cancer. So that'll be all about joy, pleasure, fun. What do you like to do? You know, hobbies. How do you like to spend your time? You were describing earlier what it was like having
Yeah.
Jupiter in your fifth house over the last year. So that's an area of life that might be magnified, kind of this inner child work of just like being creative and expressing yourself and having fun. You know, dating also is associated with the fifth house. So maybe your love life will get a little bit zhuzhed up if you've got Jupiter going in your fifth house. Okay, so the sixth house represents a couple different things. It has to do with your physical health. It has to do with your routines and kind of your mundane daily life. And it's also house associated with work and service. So it's
Mhm.
like, what's the rhythm of your days? What tasks do you do on a daily basis to take care of yourself and to take care of other people? And this could be work or labor, you know, that you're getting paid for or not. It doesn't have to exist within the capitalist framework.
Yeah.
But those are the kinds of themes of work and service that will be magnified with Jupiter going into your sixth house. Maybe that'll be really great for your physical health and your work life. Maybe Jupiter will be expanding, you know, problems in those areas rather than
Yeah.
benefits. So we can't say for sure whether it's going to be
Right.
good or bad because there's nothing so black and white in astrology or in life, I think.
Mhm.
But those themes will certainly be amplified one way or another.
Yeah. Um, okay, so moving into the seventh place of our committed partnerships, marriage, our relationships that are a little more high stakes than just like a fling. Jupiter is also traditionally the planet of marriage.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying you're for sure getting married. Don't put that on me. But if you have Jupiter transiting the seventh, definitely there is um, a highlighted experience of your relationships with other people. Um, Eighth house. So this is kind of a more nebulous house. It has to do with themes of loss, trauma, death. It's not all bad. It also rules other people's stuff. If you think about the second as being what's yours, eighth house is what is other people's, and also like what you get from other people that you can't provide for yourself. So again, it's kind of a double-edged situation. I think about, I mean, with the planet of good luck and like abundance being in the house that has to do with like inheritance, or the things that people give you because of their high esteem for you.
Mm.
The eighth house absolutely though also has to do with the bullshit that other people bring into relationship with you that is not necessarily yours to unpack, it's theirs. And so you think about like not straightforward relationship dynamics. Things need to be looked at and kind of like you're wading through the muck a little bit of like possible unhealthy relationship dynamics might be top of mind or becoming very, very apparent for you. Ninth house is the house of higher learning, philosophy, um, religion, spiritual growth. Really, I think of the ninth place as um, whatever personal growth means to you, whatever like
Mm.
journey
Hmm.
you're on personally, whether that looks like, hey, I'm going to college, I'm traveling to a foreign place where I'm being exposed to these different ideas. Um, Definitely ninth place has something to do with enhancing your worldview or expanding your worldview or your horizons.
Totally. Yeah, and Jupiter has a natural association with the ninth house because it's the ruler of Sagittarius, which is the ninth sign.
Mhm.
So the ninth house is all about like expanding your horizons and broadening your perspective. And hey, Jupiter's the planet of expansion. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty like, again, pure, powerful kind of expression of that energy.
Mhm.
But maybe you have Cancer in your 10th house, which is also a house related to work. That could be your career, what you do to pay your rent. But the 10th house is the most visible, the highest part of your chart. And to me, it really has to do with your calling and your mission in the world. So that's what would really be highlighted for you over the next year, where it's a kind of expanding your idea of what is my role in the community? What am I contributing to the collective? Like, why am I here? What do I have to
Mhm.
give? A little bit like what you were saying with the second house. With the second house, I see it as being a little bit more kind of personal in terms of like your confidence, your self-worth, and like the stable foundation of resources you have. The 10th house is then kind of coming from that foundation at the bottom of the chart to like shining your light out into the world and contributing what you can to the collective, which, an important time for us all to be doing that right now.
Mhm.
Maybe you have Cancer in the 11th house, which is associated with a couple different things. The 11th house has to do with your long-term goals and dreams for your life. This is
Mhm.
like your 10, 20, 30-year plan. Like, what kind of old person do you want to be?
Mhm.
It's also a house that has to do with community, your allies, with networks and organizations. And those two things might seem a little bit weird in terms of how they relate to each other. But the idea with the 11th house really is authenticity. If
Mhm.
you know for sure authentically what kind of person you want to be, then you can find the allies and organizations and communities that are aligned with that kind of person you want to grow into. What are your goals and who are the people who can help you to achieve them in a mutually beneficial relationship? Like, I'm an astrologer, so I want to hang out with astrologers. I want to hang out with you, Magdelyn, and
Yeah.
learn from each other and help each
Yeah.
other achieve these goals of spreading this message and doing this kind of work in the world. So that's what the 11th house is all about.
Very
And
quickly
what,
before you jump into 12th,
yes,
sorry.
no worries.
So from again, this is just like from a Hellenistic point of
Mm-hmm.
view. This is not like astrology, period. This is just like a traditional point of view. The 11th house is said to be the joy of Jupiter. And that
Yeah.
there's like some symbolic overlap between what Jupiter wants for you, which is abundance, success, and like the kinds of help like that you need, whether that's through people, networks. It wants to help you achieve your dreams. And so there is some subject matter overlap if you have Cancer in the 11th and Jupiter is transiting Cancer.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, Jupiter, again, it's very big picture. It's very
Mm-hmm.
expansive. It's like that Sagittarian arrow flying over the
Yeah.
landscape, seeing everything from this bird's eye view. And the
Yeah.
11th house very much has that kind of vibe as well. So that makes a lot
Mhm.
of sense. It's like that's going to be about the kind of zooming out, the big picture planning,
Yeah.
whereas something like the 8th house is more like diving down into like the deep shadow work and like
Yeah.
surrender and vulnerability, right? So different kind of ways of looking at it.
Mhm.
And then the last house that you might have Cancer in would be the 12th house, the final house of the chart. Associated with Pisces, which is the 12th sign, which Jupiter rules. So there's also a natural resonance here. But the
Okay.
kind of expansion associated with the 12th house as the last house, it often has to do with losses and
Mhm.
endings, where sometimes you got to make space. You got to get rid of the old in order to welcome in the new. So having Jupiter in the 12th, there could be a lot of, things in your life that end during that period, hopefully for the better in the big picture. But the 12th house is very much associated with like retreating kind of resting, like ending cycles, and also with spirituality. It's a house that has a lot to do with spiritual connection, being ruled by the very spiritual sign of Pisces.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an area that could be expanded by Jupiter for you over the next year, where you're really kind of going on this internal journey of like a little bit of retreat, but really kind of expanding yourself on a spiritual level, really connecting, to other realms or other dimensions, however you see it. And yeah, really leaning into that kind of like expansive, like divine love and forgiveness and connection, which, yeah, I think is such an important energy for us to be bringing into this era.
Definitely. Beautiful. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing this time with me. This has been
Yay!
really, really cool. I look forward to doing it again.
Same. Oh my gosh,
um,
same. So for now, if any of y'all want to support this budding, blossoming collaboration that we're doing, please like this video, comment on it, share it, spread it around. We're going to post this in long form content on YouTube, and we're both very much in the early stages of trying to grow our YouTube channels. We'll also probably be posting some pieces of this on other platforms and spreading all of this goodness around. But please do just engage with this. That would be really, really supportive to both of us. And then just as a reminder of where to find us, for me, you can find me at Alice Pope Astrology here on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. And if you want to book a reading with me and do a reading in a more evolutionary style like I described, you can either hit me up on social media like DM me, or you can go to my website, alicepopeastrology.com, and book a reading with me on there, or also check out my free astrology blog where I write about all of these cool transits happening up in the sky. So that's me,
yeah.
but Magdalene, do you want to remind us where we can find you?
Yes. So I'm at delphi.astro here on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. If you would like to book with me, you can visit my website, delphiastro.com. Otherwise, of course, you can shoot me a DM on one of the social media platforms.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I really look forward to working with more of y'all. If you have questions about how this Jupiter transition is going to look for your life with the different houses and positions that it has in your chart, just connecting more with this part of yourself.
Mhm.
But Magdalene, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so fun, so
Thank
amazing. I
you.
really look forward to working with you more in the future.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm also excited about Jupiter going to Cancer, and even more so after getting to unpack all of
I
this with
know,
you.
right? Oh, I'm gonna celebrate so hard. Cool. Thank you so, so much. This has been really wonderful. Definitely, we will have to do this again.
Hell yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
All right.
Yay!